This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, here we have created a roadmap. So we have given the timelines for the roadmap, followed by the backlog. So a product backlog where we are based on the user stories points what we have given and all. Of course, we have given user story point only for the first user story. Now I am giving user story points for the other ones as well. Good. So the second was system user under the first sprint, I mean to say system user and all that. So here I'm giving for every user story, because two things we have to do: either story points you are giving or as task calculations and all. Now story point estimations I am providing here. The second one, the first user story, we have given three user story points. For this I have given two. I've given two user story points. Thinking on say. Whereas we have other epic. We have two more user stories. For this, I'm giving story points as 5. Okay, I'm giving all different. I'm not giving everything the same. 5 we have given. Next, for this user story, I'm giving 3 points. I hope you understood, right? So how story points will be given and all that. So on what basis story points will be given and all, so that we will be knowing about the complexity as well as the value of the business. So this is how generally the story points creation and all everything we do. So whatever are there in the everything in the sprint backlog. So the sprint started wherein this sprint we have given the timeline of 2 weeks. 2 weeks time and all everything we have given here. So two weeks of time we have provided for every sprint. Wherein assume that there was another sprint we have created. Second sprint. Wherein we are adding one more user story into this. Right? So because we have only one user story here. Now there is a in continuation of the sprints what we are doing usually. So there is some possibilities here, right? So there are some changes can be done. Point to be noted is whenever the sprint started, assume that in the first sprint, if you see, I think we have given 2 weeks time for this, right? So 2 weeks time we have given for this first sprint to complete with. In 2 weeks of time, in process of these 2 weeks, usually how 2 weeks we have calculated, I already told you. One is roadmap, timelines of the roadmap. Second, what will be the approximate time of epic time will be taken, right? For example, if there are 3 user stories in that particular epic, we see how much time it will be taken for every user story to complete. So for that, you have to minimize that into tasks. So because each and every user story will be divided into tasks and all that. So that task effort estimation will be calculated. So whether it is a database designing or user interface designing, whatever it is, how much time it will be taken. So based on that, usually that epic duration and all everything will be decided. Now we have taken 2 user stories from first epic and 1 user story from other epic, and we have created sprint where we have given 2 weeks of time for this to complete. Now, once we have started, there will be a review meeting, right? Sprint review meeting will be conducted by us. In this review, we come to know what exactly what we called the progress of the work, what we have completed so far, what we have completed. All this we see in the review meeting. But whereas when it comes to retrospection, we found that the fifth user story, whatever the five, OBA5 I am saying, right? Assume that this is the fifth user story, required to make some changes in this, right? So we may require to do some changes in that. Now, in this sprint review, we came to know that there is an enhancement which is required for the fifth one. It means creation of web services and all that. So what we have to do is this user story means a new user story, I'm saying, not the existing one. New user story that I can transfer to the second sprint. Understood? New user story I can transfer to the second sprint. That can be done by us, right? So it is asking us because it will ask you the action to be accepted, right? So are we accepting? Because sprint scope will be affected because if you are changing in mid of the sprint. That's the reason why we were doing these changes and all everything in the retrospection. Understood? Right. So if you are middle of the sprint, because in the beginning, if you remember, I told you, right? So whenever there is a sprint which was started, because if you remember that sprint was started already, because we have started the sprint and we have given the timelines of 2 weeks for that. That's the reason why the scope will get affected because of this, because the existing user story or the functionality what you need to develop with respect to the web services itself is concerned. This, if we would like to change this to the next sprint, in middle of the sprint, I mean to say, it will get affected. The scope of the sprint will get affected. The reason why we are not, we don't change the existing user story, or we can't change the existing user story, or we can't transfer the existing user story to the second sprint. We can't do that. If you do, there is a possibility of scope affection. So for this, what we have to do, we have to write another user story here for the same web services and all that. So we can write other user story mentioning what kind of user stories it was and all that. So in addition to this creation of web services, right? For example, a system user wants you to create web services so that I can connect with other sites for the payment, right? So this is what generally a payment gateway is. Now we are writing a sub user story for the fifth one because customer is asking us to make some additions and all everything on the fifth one. So the existing user story what we have written should not get affected for any other means. So what are we doing here? Now we were adding some other user story, we were writing some other user story and we are adding into this. Now if you want to write user story, another user story and all that, are we writing directly on the sprint? Is it possible? Are we doing it? No. If you want to add some of the user stories into the existing sprint, means once the sprint review done is, I'm saying all this. Whenever there is a sprint review is happening, in that sprint review, in the sprint retrospection. In the sprint retrospection, we found that there are some changes required on the fifth one, wherein we may be required to do some updations. If you want to do updations, you need to write a separate one as it is, right? So you're not authorized to edit it. So to write that sprint, you are not writing it directly here, right? You may have this provision here to write it. But normally what we do, go to the roadmap, whatever the epics we have created and all that. So in this epics, you are going to write in user stories whichever is already finalized here. Understand? Clear? Right? We have two user stories which was written. So payment gateway, creation of web services is what. So I'm writing another user story. So I want uh, to have I want you to create an interface, because assume that I'm a new person for the technology, right? So I'm new to that connectivity and all that, right? Being a user, I'm saying, right? User may not be expertise in all the fields. The user may be expertise in some fields, and maybe in some fields he may not be expertise. So being a user, I want to, because I don't want more complexity, right? Because as a user, I don't want to take more complexity in doing the work. So what I'm doing, I want to make my work more simplified by creating user interfaces and all everything in a simple way. So I'm asking you to create a new interface, an interface where I can use it easily and for to connect with other applications and all that, right? So I want you to create an interface which is flexible for me to work with, right? Which is flexible so that I can connect easily. Means for this, what you are doing, you are writing APIs here. Right? You are writing right. So you are writing API here, right? API stands for Application Programming Interfaces. We call it as APIs. APIs and all everything we have to write. So that using these APIs, wherein, but make sure the API is what you guys are creating, means development team, with reference to development team. Whatever the APIs you are creating should be flexible for me to understand. This is what my expectation is. So as a user, I am expecting you to create an API, right? Create an interface which is flexible in its nature uh, by creating a new API so that user API and all everything can be created so that I can connect easily, because being a layman, I'm finding difficult. So you are writing a new user story on the Epic. This is what we have to do if you want to update your user stories, because you could see here there is a user story which was written, which is there in the backlog here. So updating of user stories is a continuous process. At the same time, prioritizations also will get changed for customer from time to time, right? It will not remains the same for every time. Changes of requirements and all everything will happens all the time. Not only changes, whatever the updations do we require to do, everything we have to do it in different ways, because as long as you are conducting, why are we conducting sprint, why are we conducting daily scrum meetings? Daily scrum meeting reason is this, because whatever the requirement customer is having earlier, right, yesterday, may not be for today, right? So tomorrow, today he may be coming with new requirements, right? So which you are not assured, which you are not, we cannot say, right? There is a possibility that customer may be expecting us to add some other new things and all everything, right? So there is a possibility that we need to ensure with, right? So because that changes and all everything happens sometimes, wherein make sure we have to do those changes accordingly. But the existing user stories we don't change. When you go for interview, because why am I saying all these in detail? Because more than the action, explanation plays a vital and important role in your interviews. When you go for interviews, this is where most of the times, because nobody will ask you to open JIRA board and nobody will ask you to do this, right? But there are some questions which they will ask you. If this is the situation, what is your answer? Because there are some situations which you come across when you attend for interviews and all that. The Scrum Master training you're undergoing because of to get opportunities. So Scrum Master training, in the role of a Scrum Master, when you go for an interview, people for sure they will ask these kind of questions. First question: are we going to do any kind of changes on the sprint which was already started? Right? If not possible, what you're going to do? Point number one. The first point is, as I mentioned a couple of times, again I'm repeating for the final time. No changes on the existing user story is allowed in the sprint once it is started. Without one, if the sprint was not started, you can do as many changes as you want. But once the sprint started, you are not authorized or allowed to do any changes in the existing sprint. Point to be noted. This is point number one, which we have to be very clear with, right? So because there is no changes are allowed to do sprint, are allowed to do changes and all everything on the sprint. This is one. Now, if you want, if the change is something inevitable, right? What we are going to do here. If the changes are inevitable to do that, we'll ask management team to write a user story as separate with the consent of team members, whatever the necessary user story and all everything, based on the necessity and all that, that will be transferred to the next sprint. So when this will be discussed in a separate meeting we conduct. It is not something like daily scrum meeting, right? So daily scrum meetings we don't discuss all this. Because most of the people have some misconception here that daily scrum meeting we are conducting, right? So in this daily scrum meeting we are discussing all this. So it is not happens. Daily scrum meeting is a continuous process you are following, right? Because you are asking people to come and attend and all. It's a continuous process you are following in daily scrum meeting. What I mean to say. But whereas if these kind of situations we have arised, there will be a meeting which will be conducted as separate, which is nothing to do with sprint review or retrospection. Retrospection, of course, once it is done, you are doing. That's a different thing altogether. So we will be discussing in mid of it, and whatever the necessary possibilities, right, to add that sprint and all everything, those user story will be added to the next sprint. We are not doing anything in mid of it. So what we are doing, whatever the user story, if you see here, the backlog and all that. So this you are transferring to the second sprint as a high priority. Why? Because before you are going to provide authorizations and all that. So what is required? You need to create a user interface. So you are creating a web services. Point number one. Point number two. First is you are creating a web services for online payment gateway. Point number one for this particular functionality. Remember, there are two functionalities you could see. One is mobile enabled services for a user. Second is online payment gateway, right? Two different things. You could see those differences of the epic on the end of the user stories here. The first two are something relating to mobile enabled. The remaining three, irrespective of the splits, you could see on online payment gateway. Now, what we have to do here is, if you could see here, first what we are doing, first in the first sprint, last user story was to create web services for the benefit of the payments, right? So this is what the user story we are creating. But earlier, you don't see interfaces in that. What we have, we were asking for authorization. This is what customer has told earlier. What customer has told us earlier is that create web services. So once web service is created, you can provide authorizations to the people so that you, whatever the required information and all everything will be edited by them, right? So this is what they said. After that, there is a change happened. What the change happened? User or the customer stakeholders are asked us to add some interfaces and all, right? APIs. To write some APIs and all is what customer has told. And that too, this API, whatever the API we have created, should not be in the DOM, right? It should be the first one in the second sprint. This is what they have asked us. So what we have done, we have written a user story in the epic, in the second epic, which is because that is belongs to the second epic, right? Not belongs to the first one, because first one is mobile enabled, second is online payment gateway. So whatever the changes and customer is expecting us to do, everything will be on the second one, right? Second one. So that's the reason we have written on the second one. The third point we have written here, the seventh point we have written. So and whatever the seventh user story we have written, that you could see on the second sprint, first importance. You are giving this as a first importance. Why? Because once creation of web service is done, there must be a connectivity using interfaces, APIs and all. This is what should be, this is what the requirements of the customer here. After that, whatever the changes, whatever the authorization confirmations and all, everything you are doing next. Okay, so because OBA 6, right? If you can take 6 user story, 6 number user story, once everything is done, to payment, to process the payment or to edit something and all that, this authorization is required, right? Because if you want to make some changes in the fields what you have already profiled, what you have created, what will happen? There is an authorized confirmation you get it. Right? So you'll get a OTP password or something of that sort. Using that OTP password to your registered mobile number, you can edit the profile, right? Edit the required information or edit the profile can be done. Point number one. The same thing, it can be used for payments also, right? Because for payments, usually in some application, if you see, in some applications in online this thing, banking, if you want to transfer payment or if you want to make payment, you can pay it directly because there are two different things. One, if you are transferring money to some other account, the process will be different. Payment, the process will be different. If you are transferring money, once you have added the beneficiary details or whenever you are doing quick pay option, when you have chosen quick pay option, whatever it is, whenever you're transferring money, there will be a transaction password in some websites. If you could observe closely, in some websites, there will be a password as separate that we call it as transaction password. Transaction password. What is transaction password? Transaction password is applicable only for money transfers. It is only for money transfers. So what we are doing here, transaction, for transacting money to other accounts, what we are doing, we are creating a transaction password. Make sure customer has to create transaction password in the beginning. So how he come to know? It is depends on what kind of services in online banking application customer is using. For example, some customer, business people, assume that, for example, there were not the employees and all. So if you take business people will have a lot of transactions rather than if you're comparing with other person because they have to transfer money to other accounts to get some products or raw material, whatever it is, blah, 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 right? So what they want the transactions to be secure all the time, point number one. At the same time, further security, for the benefit of security, these online banking service providers, the bank people, ask us to provide a transaction password. So make sure whoever is creating an online banking account, if you are creating transaction password here, we have to open an option in the beginning itself, in the registration form itself. Along with the password you are creating, you have to create transaction password there, right? You are not creating transaction password once the transaction you have initiated, right? You're not doing this. When you're doing it, whenever you have initiated a process of creating profiles and all, there itself you are mentioning it. What you are mentioning? You are mentioning about this transaction or everything means whenever they are creating this profile, along with the password, they are creating a transaction password. So then only whenever they are transferring money, they can give that password and all everything. This is for payments. This is for money transfer. Second, for payment. For payment, for example, we are paying electricity. For example, customer is paying electricity bill or water bill or something of that sort. Do we get any transaction password for that? No. What we get an OTP. OTP, one-time password, we call it as OTP. Where we get this OTP? We get this OTP to the registered mobile numbers, right? To the registered mobile number, because whenever an customer has registered his credentials and all everything in online banking, there will be some this thing. There will be some what we called. There will be some registered mobile number will be given. Nowadays, the situation, the security concerns and all everything were increased a lot. Now, a registered mobile number and registered email ID has to be given. And we can choose any one option. Either Do you require to get a message to your email ID or for a mobile? Normally, mobile is much easier for us because it will be handy. So most of the people choose that option. Usually, I'm saying it varying from sometimes. So here, what we do, we have to provide an OTP password, whatever the password we have received there. Then only the payment transaction will be completed. Understood? So there are two different things. One, for sending money to other account and all, you require transaction password. But whereas when you are paying some money, right, for different utilities and all that, right? So you don't require any transaction password. What you required an OTP which you have received for the registered mobile number. That if you can give here, so that it will get completed. For example, if there is an exceptional case. For example, I have not. Some customer has done the transaction. OTP he has received, but he has not given any OTP. But the transaction completed. Right? Who is the responsibility for this? Kajal, Lindsay, Neerajan. If there is a transaction happened, they must make sure they have to complete, they have to provide OTP. This is the fundamental rule. Unless until OTP hasn't given, the transaction should not get completed, right? So this is the rule. Now, sometimes without, there was no OTP was given, assume that there was no OTP. Normally it won't happen. I'm just exceptional cases, because whenever we are developing a logic, there is an exception we have to write. There are two conditions. One is if, second is else. If everything goes right, what will be the next step? If something goes wrong, 0.1%, right? What should be the next step, right? So this is the thing. Any logic, anywhere, the logic, these two will be applied. If and else condition. Now you have taken a situation where there was no OTP given by the customer, right? There is no OTP given by the customer, but still the transaction succeeded. What could be the result and who has the responsibility? Kajal, Lindsay, Neeraja. Who has the responsibility?
The Scrum Master?
No, we are talking about the logic. We are not talking about Scrum Master, right? Scrum Master is for development. We are talking about the practicalities of the project, right? Because we are taking online bank. Because all these discussions will happen in Scrum meetings and all that. The reason why these discussions and all everything we are doing. For example, we are developing an online banking. I'll repeat the question again. I am the Scrum Master. You all belongs to the team. We are developing a logic for transacting, for payments, online payments and all everything. Uh, we are creating an OTP password, right? So that part we have created. Now, sometimes customer, whenever we have completed the application, whenever customer has started doing transaction without providing OTP, sometimes the transaction got succeeded. Who has the responsibility? Who has to take that responsibility? Client has to take the responsibility, right or not? Because banking person or banking client is asking us to develop the functionality. End of the day, whose fault is this? Whose fault is this? Client's is the client fault. Why? Because client has to cross check. So for every logic, whatever the logic we have written, there is an exemption has to be written. Am I right or not? Understood. Nirja, Kajal, Lindsay.
Yes.
Say yes or no, so that I could understand whether you understood or not.
Yes.
Right. So here there is an exception. So these kind of exceptions we come across when we are connecting meetings. So why I'm giving this example, because whenever we are conducting meetings with in regular intervals and also these kind of add-on things we get, because initially customer hasn't informed you this, but customer informed you an exception there that if there is no OTP password was given, but still the transaction was completed, but it has to clearly state that the transaction was not done by the customer. It was been done by some other person has done the transaction on behalf of him. Right now, what is an exception? This information has to be reported within fraction of 1 hour or 2 hours of time. Right, within this time it has to, so that there is a possibility to resolve the issue. Otherwise, it will not be resolved. Right. So this is an exception. Are we writing or not? Understood?
Yes, understood.
Right or not? So these are the add-ons. Whenever these are the add-ons, these kind of, as an example I'm saying this, like this there are multiple examples you may be facing. So these add-ons are something connecting to the sprints what we are developing, because what should be the next, once the OTP password was given, that OTP password is not being provided but still the transaction is completed, so immediate action has to be taken. So we have to develop a functionality for the action what is to be taken by the end user. That must be your first priority in the next sprint. Understood? Right? That must be the first priority, because transaction is completed, but the transaction was not done by the customer or someone. So immediately the next resolution step, he has to raise a complaint in so and so medium within within a span of 1 hour or 2 hours, till from the time of transaction starts. Transaction completes, right? From the time of transaction completes, customer has to raise a complaint within 1 or 2 hours of time. Then only the transaction will get completed. Otherwise, it will not get completed. Understood? Right or not? So these are the add-ons which will be added in each and every time whenever we have started the sprint, because these kind of discussions will come across. If we feel that these discussions were something essential and important for us to start with, right? So what we have to do is these and all everything we will be discussing in a separate meeting and all that, and those will be prioritized in the next sprint with the consent of team members. Now, with reference to the role of a product owner, it is nothing to do with role of a product owner here, as far as the implementation is concerned. But as far as the authorization is concerned, yes, product owner has to provide us the authorization to move ahead. This is what the change we have to do when we want to add some new user stories. New user story means new functionality, I mean to say. If you want to do some new functionalities, or if you want to add some new functionalities into the existing one, this is what the changes we have to make in the existing project, what we are running for a long time. Any doubts on this? Neerja,
No doubts.
Rajal, Lindsay, is it clear or not? So why are we adding sprint? Why are we adding this user story in the sprint, in the second sprint? For this, this is what the whole example is. So there are a lot of meetings. Being a Scrum Master, you must be ready to discuss about the in and outs of the project. It's not only about creating a JIRA board, because creation of JIRA board is not something difficult for you guys, or not you, anyone to do with. But what to write and all everything, there must be a discussion happens. So without your discussing with the consent of Scrum team and all that, you cannot add that functionality in on a form of user story and all everything in Jira board. So creation of Jira board is one task. Second, if you want to write something on the Jira board and all, there must be a discussion happen. So there are some logics you have to see. right? So based on those logics and all, everything we have to see, we have to make sure whether everything is fall on place, everything is going according to the requirements or not. That being a Scrum Master, it is our responsibility to see whether is the sprint going according to the goal what we have created or not. Why we are not doing any kind of changes on the existing focus of goal what we have created. Whatever you want to do, you are creating as separate, and this prioritization you are making, because here normally this is here, right? So this is in the backlog, the seventh one. What we did, whatever the backlog created we did, that you are transferring to the second sprint, that too as the first priority. This will be the first priority here. Understood? This is the first priority, right? So because you are developing in the second sprint, because that sprint was already started. If you can see here the difference, you can see. Yeah, you can see the difference here. The sprint is in the option of complete with the first sprint. Why? Because we have already started the sprint. We have already started the sprint. Now, here the sprint was not started, sprint 2. Why? Because once this is complete, once you are clicking on this complete, this sprint, you can initiate the second sprint to be started. As long as you are not completing the second sprint, it is not enabling here, right? So because you cannot start the second sprint, because when you can start the next sprint, when will it happen? When you have multiple teams, because if you have a single team, you are completing sprint one after another. But there is a difference here. For example, if you are taking large scale projects, enterprise level transformation and all that, multiple teams works on the same work, right? On the same project. Excuse me. So multiple teams works on the same project in multiple places. Teams are working, right? Assume that. So if the teams are working in different places, then there is a possibility that start doing sprints and all everything in a multiple formats and all everything is possible. When it is possible, when you have multiple teams. But here we are not having any multiple teams. What are the teams we have and all that? The team is only one. So there is a one team. So once the sprint is started, as long as the sprint was not completed, you are not enabling an option for to start the second sprint. So here sometimes there is a possibility that we want to delete or edit, right? The duration part or something like that sort. Normally we don't update. Usually there will be an option available, but we don't update the duration, because there is a rule which will be framed. If it is 2 weeks, we have to complete in 2 weeks time. So even though there is an update, there is no extension of timelines will be given by the customer. Why? Because because this is something connecting to the release plan what we have made. Right? Usually this release plan will be 8 weeks or something or so, maybe 8 weeks or more, right? 12 weeks or something of that sort. So within that timeline you have to complete. That's the reason why whatever the first sprint we have created, the sprint never will have any kind of additions, right? Whatever the changes you want to make, once the sprint started, you have an option only to transfer to the next level, not in this level. Clear?
Yes, it's clear.
Yourself, Neerja, Lindsay, are you clear or not? Okay. So we discuss about the remaining thing, adding these people and all that, right? So those things we are discussing on tomorrow's session, right? How about these people, right? Dashboard that I'm going to discuss it.
Okay. I have
Okay.
a quick question for Nico. Can we have like the last day, if we have time, to go over some interview questions and things like that? Is it possible?
The reason why interview questions I am not conducting as separate, Lindsay, what I'm doing is in the course of training itself, I am covering all that, if you remember, because whatever
Yeah.
I've covered about entry only. If you
Mm-hmm.
want, last session I will take. What I do, I'll give you some question and answers.
Yes,
I have
please.
FAQs. I have FAQ, frequently asked questions document is there with me. And
Okay.
what kind of questions people will ask you in interview and how to answer, because these questions will be something tricky, right? It is not something to do with JIRA board or something like. People don't ask you. People will ask you like, for example, the kind of questions I'll ask you. Anyway, you have asked me, appreciate that. You have asked me in between. The kind of questions you will come across, I'll tell you. For example, you are conducting daily scrum meeting,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there were 5 people are there. 5 people are supposed to attend every daily scrum. This is the principle and this is the discipline. For suppose 1 or 2 people were not attending in regular intervals. They are not attending at all, right? They are not following at all. So what will be your decision on that? Understood. So these are the generalized questions. When you go for an interview, please remember, for all you 3 guys, I'm saying, right? So
Mm-hmm.
don't expect that what is sprint planning, what is sprint review. Don't expect all these questions, because that can be prepared, that can be explained by anyone. Not a problem. Because if you are sitting for 2 weeks, people can understand that easily. But the questions you will come across when you go for an interview, because they want to cross check whether you have experience really or not, right? That is what the matter here.
Mm-hmm.
So the kind of question will be like this, because these questions you don't get answers, right? Because there is no answer for that, right? Because there is
Yeah.
no answer is available online to you, right? Because that is only with comes with experience. Because if I'm experiencing something of that sort, I can answer, right? Because I can't see some other thing in website and I cannot answer that, because you don't get answers for these questions. So that kind of questions I'll give you as FAQs,
Okay.
followed by this.
Sounds
This
good.
kind of I'll explain on the last session, because today is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay.
Possible to take it on Sunday also. Sunday of mine. Sunday of mine I'm taking. Sunday of mine also I'll take the session,
Okay.
because this week I'll complete, because yesterday I have not taken, so that I am compensating on the next week, this week only. So
Okay.
possible
Sounds
what I do
good.
last conduct that FAQ session, so that you'll be understood. Clear everyone?
Okay. Yep. Clear. Thank you.
So, about the FAQs, so you will be asking FAQs on the last session. So you will be sending the recorded video of that too, right?
Which one?
For the last
Recordings I am
session,
doing video, right?
yeah,
I think that 18th day or someone you said
18th
I
and
missed.
19th.
Those two I'll see in my repository and I'll forward it to you. But every recording I've sent, if I'm not wrong,
Okay.
almost all the recordings
So
I
no,
sent.
I haven't received any recording for 18th and 19th. I don't know about
That
the
is what I'm
17th.
saying. Except two,
Yeah.
right? Except two, because I
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
go back. That is on the other GoToMeeting link. I will see the old one and I'll send it to you. That I will
yeah. Okay.
see. Except those remaining, I sent.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And you will be taking sessions on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, like all 3 days.
This week I'll complete Kajal, because yesterday I have
Okay.
not taken session because of few reasons. So what I'm saying is this week I'll be completing. This week of mine I'm saying. Today is Thursday,
Okay.
Friday, Thursday morning for me. Yours is Wednesday night, right? Wednesday night.
Okay.
Thursday
So
morning.
like I have to ask this that I won't be able to attend the sessions for third, fourth, and fifth. I'm not in town, so I won't be able. So like if I'll go through the recordings and if I'll have any doubts, so can I ask those
Yes,
doubts to you? Yeah.
If you
Okay.
are
Yeah.
not available, please go through the recordings. If you
Yeah.
find any, if you have any questions and all, you can email me or you can text me, so
Okay.
that
Yeah.
I will
Yeah. That.
explain.
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
problem.
That is fine. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm available on WhatsApp
Okay.
and all that. So chat with
Okay.
me. You can speak also.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll connect tomorrow. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.